former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Impeachment, emblem of the left's one-step thinking. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. As we break down what happened or didn't happen or was just a replay of what happened in the House, as the Senate deliberates the fate of President Trump with the outcome all but certain, we'll discuss how this impeachment embodies the shallow, short-sighted, one-step thinking of the left as they continue to descend further into the quicksand of undiluted hatred for the 45th president. We'll be joined by Joe Schaeffer, crack political columnist for LibertyNation.com, plus Liberty Nation's man on the ground and in the middle of the dramatic showdown over guns in Virginia, Legal Affairs Editor Scott Cosenza.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What?, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. What if they gave a Senate impeachment party and no one came? Well, crafty old Mitch McConnell made sure that's pretty much what would happen in a trial which everybody already knows will exonerate Trump, holding Republicans together to resist the Democrats' clarion call for more witnesses and more evidence. Never mind that no crime was even alleged in the two flimsy articles of impeachment sent up by the House. The first for abuse of power, a vague charge which any president could be accused of, and the second for obstruction of Congress because Trump dared to actually, properly, employ the country's system of justice, the courts, to evaluate his claim that his closest White House confidants should not be compelled to testify. That's not obstructing anything. That's asking a court to settle a dispute between the executive and legislative branches, which is one of the most basic purposes of the judicial branch. So you knew the whole trial would be little more than a spectacle, yet another spectacle, a rehash of all the same hysterical Democratic charges of Trump as an existential threat to the nation in a trial with a verdict already in the bag. So what we got was the upper chamber's version of impeachment theater, or perhaps playground theater, perfectly embodied by this exchange between House Manager, Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler, Trump's lawyer Pat Cipollone, and then a warning from the presiding Chief Justice John Roberts to play nice in the sandbox.
They lie, and lie, and lie, and lie. And the president sometimes relies on a theory of absolute immunity that says that he can order anybody in the executive branch not to testify to the House or the Senate or to a court. It's embarrassing the president's counsels would talk about this today.
You don't deserve, and we don't deserve, what just happened. Mr. Nadler came up here and accused you of a cover-up. He's been making false allegations against the president. The only one who should be embarrassed, Mr. Nadler, is you.
I think it is appropriate at this point for me to admonish both the House managers and the President's counsel in equal terms to remember that they are addressing the world's greatest deliberative body.
One is left to wonder if Justice Roberts was using air quotes when he called the Senate the world's greatest deliberative body. He wasn't. But the president's attorney carried on by ridiculing the Democrat claims that the Senate trial is phony.
They falsely accuse people of phony political investigations. Really. Since the House Democrats took over, that's all we've had from them. They started impeaching him the minute he was elected. They've weaponized the House of Representatives to investigate incessantly their political opponent.
For 3 years they've been doing that, and they now face the virtual certainty of a stinging defeat in the Senate, where nary a crack has formed in Republicans' defense of the president. But Democrats carry on with their scandalous charges after using the terms obstruction, extortion, quid pro quo, and other horrible-sounding descriptions of Trump's behavior. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer decided to settle this time for the C word, cover-up.
Leader McConnell has just gone along with President Trump's desire to cover up this trial, hook, line, and sinker. His resolution creates a trial that is rushed, with as little evidence as possible, and done in the dark of night. If they were so confident of their case, if President Trump were, if McConnell were, then why wouldn't they want it in broad daylight? Why are they trying to do things at 2 in the morning?
Because that's when nobody will be watching. Not that many are anyway. Because nobody cares, because everybody already knows the outcome. And McConnell will be damned if he's going to give the Democrats any more prime time to recycle and regurgitate the same lines of attack as they did in the House. But one of the rising stars in the GOP, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, telegraphed clearly that Senator Schumer should be careful what he hopes for.
I really thought that they made a mistake, and it was an interesting choice in highlighting the role of Hunter Biden and Burisma. The House prosecutors spent a good amount of time this afternoon saying how there was absolutely no corruption involved between Hunter Biden and Burisma, that Joe Biden had no conflict of interest when he got the prosecutor with jurisdiction fired who was potentially looking into Hunter Biden and Burisma. So I think that it was a very strange choice on their part, but it really highlighted that so much of the House's case turns on Hunter Biden, Burisma, and saying that there was no corruption there. So here's my bottom line. If we call witnesses, I think we absolutely need to subpoena and ask for Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, the whistleblower, and maybe Adam Schiff.
Translation, if you demand to hear from the president's closest advisors, then we'll certainly call up the guys who would scandalize your Democratic Party. But as this report from NBC News makes clear, the biggest task for senators forced to sit through 12 hours a day of endless, predictable partisan rhetoric is to simply stay awake.
Shortly after 5:30 p.m., Senator James Risch, the Republican of Idaho, could be seen motionless, eyes closed, and head slumping against his right hand. Risch was the first lawmaker seen by Washington Post reporters to have clearly fallen asleep.
It's a bit like a college lecture hall. Some of them are busily taking notes. Some of them look bored out of their minds. And if they're thirsty, we're told that only 2 beverages are allowed on the Senate floor, water and milk.
Wow. Not even coffee. Talk about an endurance test. And it must be particularly galling for the 4 senators running for president who are forced off the campaign trail with the first contest in Iowa just days away. One of them is Bernie Sanders, who's been taking hits from every direction of late, and now one from the bitter loser from the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton, who spent the last 3 years trying to explain away her shattering defeat at the hands of Donald Trump, but has now turned her wrath on the man who dared to challenge her for the Democratic nomination in 2016.
Tonight, Hillary Clinton unleashing on her one-time rival Bernie Sanders. Clinton, in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, tearing open old wounds from their protracted 2016 primary that pitted Clinton against the independent senator from Vermont. He was in Congress for years. He had 1 senator support him. Nobody likes him. Nobody wants to work with him. He got nothing done. Senator Sanders today unfazed by Clinton's comments.
What's your response to that?
Look, right now, today, I am dealing with impeachment.
Why do you think the secretary is still talking about 2016?
That is a good question. Ask him.
Hell hath no fury like Hillary scorned. She says, nobody likes him, Bernie Sanders. That's what we call projection. Nobody likes Hillary. So she says that same thing about Bernie. What a pathetic loser this woman has become. Her party has begged her to go away and stay away, but now she attacks one of her party's presidential frontrunners right before the first votes are cast. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss how this whole impeachment has become the emblem of the left's shallow one-step thinking.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Success in politics has always required vision beyond the latest crisis and thinking beyond one's most extreme instincts. For Democrats, a striking inability to accomplish either fundamental task has headed them inexorably toward a ditch. Impeachment has become the emblem of the left's shallow, one-step thinking. We don't approve of and refuse to accept the results of an election that placed a despised villain in the highest seat of power. And so, instead of taking stock on why this happened and formulating the arguments to try and win back the voters who abandoned us and delivered this unspeakable result, we will simply reverse the results of the election by removing Donald Trump from office and denying him a shot at re-election. This anti-intellectual approach among the leftist intelligentsia is ironic to its core because, think about it, the consistent complaint advanced by the left against the right is that conservatism, constitutionalism is inherently anti-intellectual. But this one-step knee-jerk thinking has in fact long been a consistent thread throughout the highest ranks of leftist politicians and pundits, even though the leftist culture is so generously populated by highbrow Ivy League academics who cut their teeth debating tenured professors in the faculty lounge and lecturing on lofty ideals from their ivory towers far from the madding crowd. They say they're deep thinkers, yet they engage in economic and social policies that are formulated through not just one-step thinking, but willful ignorance of history. While constitutionally based policies so often require multiple stages of thought and reliance on what history has proven. Here's what I mean. Exhibit A is gun control, fast becoming an incendiary issue in Virginia and likely elsewhere. We'll talk with Scott Cosenza about it later in the program. The leftist view is that guns are responsible for murders, so we should simply try to outlaw as many of them as possible. Whenever a high-profile murder or mass murder occurs, the left simply calls for more gun control laws to fix future instances of the problem, no matter whether they would have changed any of the outcomes from the past. Constitutionalists favoring a strict interpretation of the Second Amendment look at the fact that more gun control applies not just to criminals, but to the vast majority of gun owners who are law-abiding, thus weakening their ability to protect themselves. But of course, criminals, by definition, do not respect or obey the law. That's why they're criminals. Therefore, they won't abide by stricter laws, but law-abiding gun owners will. And therefore, more gun control actually creates a less safe society. The left has made a single calculation there to reach its policy position. The other side has made 6 calculations. Which sounds more intellectually based to you? Then there's tax policy and reform, which stands as the signature achievement of Trump and Republicans, as we so often consider how to fix the unacceptable shortfall in government revenues caused by runaway spending. The left's knee-jerk reaction is to simply try and raise taxes on the easiest targets, ignoring the root of the problem, the cascading consequences of higher taxes, and the fact that it doesn't even begin to solve our massive budget deficits. One calculation. Constitutionalists, on the other hand, will make the argument that higher taxes burden job creators with higher costs and less profit, which means they create less jobs, which results in more private sector unemployment, less tax revenues flowing to the government, lower economic growth, and higher deficits. 6 calculations. Then consider the issue of health care. Obama and his leftist cohort saw some 15% of Americans without health insurance and said the solution was to simply force the 85% who are insured to pay for the uninsured. And now, some of the Democrats' leading presidential candidates propose to terminate all private health insurance and grant the government full control. Constitutionalists, on the other hand, have thought far more deeply about this and know that government-run health care will ultimately lower quality, raise costs, ration care, and squeeze health care providers to the breaking point. Thus, they favor the same mechanism for health care reform that works in every other area of the economy, of the private economy, the free market, with ideas like expanded health savings accounts, tort reform, small business cooperatives, and the elimination of barriers to purchasing insurance across state lines. Problems with illegal immigration. Just have the president unilaterally declare some hundreds of thousands of previously illegal aliens as legal. But the most potent example of the left's one-step thinking remains the 45th president. Trump is a threat to all we hold dear, thus we must remove him from office by whatever means avail themselves. In all of this, the single step left can be counted on for one thing. The one step they take on any given policy will draw on their most extreme instincts and be centered around providing them and the central state more control, in spite of the demonstrable, spectacular, and repeated failures of their political philosophy. I guess we shouldn't be surprised, because thinking through proven and unintended consequences requires more than one step. So the next time you see or hear the left spew their hatred at Trump, conservatives, or anything resembling a free market, or God forbid, free people, remember that their positions on most every issue are based on just a single thought. If nothing else, it will make things easier for simple-minded constitutionalists and conservatives to understand. So, as Democrats stagger through a doomed impeachment trial in the Senate, what are their presidential candidates to do when 4 of them are locked down at the Senate trial, with just over a week to go until their first contest? We'll talk it over when we return.
Where can you find honest political commentary? With sobering analysis.
Even the most trusting among us may find a company's latest plans deeply intrusive.
Accountability.
Perhaps it's time to start asking the right questions.
Deconstructing threats to our liberty.
Unparalleled insight into important stuff.
And boldly reporting the truth.
Truth is making a comeback.
Well, hello again, and welcome to Election 2020 Roundtable.
Uprising podcast of LibertyNation.com.
Abortion is functionally sexist.
From my cold, dead hand.
Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Click on youtube.com/LibertyNation.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, unbeknownst to most of the American people who are just going about their business, or the few paying attention to the late show, the Senate impeachment trial, the Democrats are now just over a week away from the first contest in their race to try and unseat President Trump. And it's a mad scramble in the run-up to the Iowa caucuses between the top 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 competitors, all bunched within a few points of each other. Joining us to review the bidding and analyze which of these candidates has helped the most and hurt the most by the ongoing impeachment crusade on Capitol Hill is our frequent contributor to Liberty Nation Radio, LibertyNation.com, political columnist Joe Schaeffer. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, as always. Now, Joe, this cannot be the way Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff drew it up in the playbook, can it? Leading presidential candidates under House arrest or perhaps Senate arrest in a trial they're certain to lose just before the State of the Union address to be delivered by an exonerated Donald Trump. Could they have miscalculated any more spectacularly than this?
Well, no, I don't think Adam Schiff cares. He's a peacock on parade. I'm sure he's enjoying every second of this moment and with little regard for his own party's presidential candidates. This is the kind of chaos going on in the Democratic Party today. But for Nancy Pelosi, this is a nightmare. She's ostensibly one of the leaders of this party on Capitol Hill, and she has lost control of the narrative completely. And now it is actually hurting three of her top-tier presidential candidates, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, top tier for sure, Klobuchar trying to be top tier. I mean, this is a disaster blowing up in their face. And like you said, all for nothing when Trump gets acquitted in the Senate. It's just going to be a meaningless gesture with negative repercussions for their presidential candidates.
Now, as you said, three of the top five presidential candidates, all of them except Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, are locked down in a Senate trial in which they won't hardly be able to even speak, and which will keep them off the campaign trail at the very time they need to be making their final pitch to Iowa voters. Now, which between Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Amy Klobuchar do you think stands to lose the most by their absence from the campaign?
I think without a doubt it's Klobuchar. Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are going to be okay. Those two, along with Biden, are going to get on the scoreboard. They're going to get enough of the percentage of voting where Iowa's not going to hurt them at all. Amy Klobuchar has kind of staked her campaign on this Midwestern nice thing, and Iowa is definitely right in her wheelhouse for that. She needs to make a good showing here. She needs to be out there on the campaign trail right now, beating the bushes, trying to get all the support she can. I think Iowa is much more important for her than it is for the top tier candidates who are going to get what they get and move on. So she's by far, to me, the senator being hurt the most by this.
Yeah, hard to disagree with that because she's staking so much on Iowa. But let's look from the opposite perspective. Which between Biden and Buttigieg do you think benefits the most from the absence of those three senators?
Well, I think it would have to be Buttigieg. Like I said, I think Biden, Bernie, and Elizabeth Warren, it's pretty much the cake is baked. They're going to get a certain level of support. One of them is going to win without separating from the other two. And I just don't think it's going to matter that much in the big picture. But for Buttigieg, again, Midwestern nice, him and Klobuchar are kind of fighting over this same turf. So maybe it gives him an advantage over her if he can claim that mantle. Basically, for me, the only thing important about Iowa, I think, is will Klobuchar and Buttigieg get enough support to move on? Will they actually underperform and hurt their campaigns? So in that regard, I think this helps Buttigieg a lot as it hurts Klobuchar.
Okay, well, we have to, of course, through all of this, keep an eye on Michael Bloomberg, who's sort of waiting in the wings, waiting to pounce on Super Tuesday on March 3rd with its 14 states in play that day. Is there still a decent chance that his vision, Bloomberg's vision of a field so divided leading up to Super Tuesday that the billionaire will be able to sort of swoop in and spend his way to the nomination? Do you think that's a realistic notion?
Well, I think his strategy is quite good. His strategy is right. I just don't think he's got the chops to be somebody who's going to get voters. You got to be a likable candidate. He's mistaken what happened with Trump in 2016. They see a billionaire who won the White House and they think his money got him there. whereas Trump had solid policy issues that connected with a vast swath of the American people on his populist American First campaign. They will not give Trump that credit. So you get someone cynical like Michael Bloomberg who thinks he can dive in and buy the nomination. Now, that said, if you're going to do that, I think it's smart to focus on states like California and Texas. He's not going to do well in Iowa. He's not going to do well in New Hampshire. Not enough to justify spending tons of money there. You know, if he's going to buy this thing, and I don't think he can, focusing on states like California and Texas is the way to go. And that is what he is doing.
I think it's fair to say that Jeb Bush is the poster child for spending tens of millions of dollars and getting nothing out of it. He got, 3 delegates in 2016 after spending like $135 million. You can take it all the way back to John Connally in 1980, who was considered the favorite because he had so much money. I don't think he even got a single delegate, maybe one. So there's a long history of candidates not being able to buy their way into the presidency. Now, do you think, Joe, that some last-minute event or statement could tip the scales for one candidate or another in Iowa, or is support pretty much hardened for most of these candidates with about a week to go?
I think what we see now is what we're going to get. And again, I think that goes back to the mediocrity of the field. Nobody separated themselves, but we have a top tier established. We have that top three, I think, with Bernie, Biden, and Warren. I just have this feeling that I was going to be significant because one of them is going to underperform. One of Klobuchar or Buttigieg is going to underperform because they're both battling for that Midwestern nice turf. And I don't think they both can get it in significant numbers. I think one of them is going to struggle, and then they're going to have questions about their viability moving forward. That's what's interesting to me about Iowa.
Okay, on that note, thank you, Joe. Thanks for joining us again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That is Joe Schaeffer, political columnist for LibertyNation.com. And in just a moment, we'll be back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have inexorably reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which contains the very name of the show within the segment. It's called Talkin' Liberty, when we're rejoined by our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
It's everybody's favorite segment of the show, Tim. I love doing it. Pleasure to be here.
You might consider not saying that every week in your introduction, but then we can take that offline at some point. Let's talk impeachment briefly, and then we're going to get to the real meat of the matter, which is your own experience in the midst of this growing crisis about guns in Virginia. So let me just get, as a constitutional lawyer, let me get your thoughts as you watched the Senate trial.
Well, the big takeaway for me, Tim, was the repeated use by Mr. Schiff and Mr. Schumer of the language of a criminal trial in America, due process, and the right to a fair trial. But they turn the notion on its head, Tim, because it's not a fair trial for the accused that they're talking about, which is how it works in American jurisprudence. Our Constitution, through numerous provisions in it and its Bill of Rights, give those who are accused of crimes certain rights, like the right to a speedy trial, for instance, the right to a jury trial, for instance. These are not rights that the state has or that the government has. So those people just keep talking about fair trial, but it's for them. They want the fairness. Chuck Schumer needs fairness, not Donald Trump. And I think it's Orwellian, and it contributes to both ignorance for people on what actual rights they have against the state and for this process as well.
Well, you wrote a great piece to that effect on LibertyNation.com this week about how, the right to a speedy trial, the right to a fair trial exists for the accused, not for the accuser, and yet they're turning it on its head. Scott, in reading that, it reminded me of hearing various sermons in church where I came away from it saying, I knew that scripture and I knew what it meant, but hearing it put that way was a real wake-up call. And I think, you've pointed out the fundamental thing. And now we can move on to the issue of guns. And Virginia, you were right in the mix of thousands of people showing up in Richmond to dispute the gun-grabbing policies that are being promoted by the Democratic Party in Virginia. Just share with us the highlights of your experience.
Well, Tim, the legacy media is still waiting for violence to occur in Richmond, still shocked that there wasn't massive amounts of violence because of all these gun owners who often had guns with them in the streets of Richmond to say to the Democrats, don't take our guns away. I happened to see a couple that I knew while I was there, a Jewish man and his black female wife. And it's like, where's the Klan rally, Tim? It was a big lie that this was some kind of like revisiting of Charlottesville Unite the Right rally. It wasn't. It was Virginians in mass saying just because Democrats won a majority in the legislature doesn't mean that gave them a blank check on taking Virginians' gun rights away.
What was the sense you got, Scott, of I think it was reported that 22,000 people showed up. Did you get a sense of how many of these people have been were longtime gun rights activists, and how many of them were emboldened by the aggressive measures of the Democratic leaders in both the legislature and the governor?
Well, they have been doing this. One of the other misinformation pieces is that this is somehow like a new event. It's called Lobby Day, and it takes place every year on Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And it's over a decade old in terms of the gun rights groups that are going down there to lobby their legislators. I talked to lots and lots of folks, Tim, and a few of them had been there before, but the numbers are so outsized. It's an infinitesimal number that usually go, a couple thousand maybe, right? Hundreds, if hundreds to 1,000. As you said, I heard that crowd estimate too. I don't know how they come up with those estimates. I can tell you, though, with the exception of the Capitol lawn area that Governor Northam had walled off from the people, the rest of the streets around it were packed full of people. I mean, packed full of people.
So how has the left in the person, so to speak, of the Democratic Party of Virginia responded to this outpouring, which has to be a wake-up call for them if they're paying attention or care? What's been the response to this outpouring of support for a basic constitutional right, the second one listed in the Bill of Rights?
Well, we're going to have to wait a little while to see, but the immediate outcome is nothing at all. The Virginia Senate passed this week the red flag law, and we're waiting to see what action the House side will take on that bill. That's the bill, Tim, that allows a police officer or prosecuting attorney in Virginia to go to court and tell a judge that somebody's crazy or dangerous and get that judge to sign a warrant for them to lose their gun rights, unless and until they prove that they can convince that judge that they're not dangerous or crazy. The stripping of all due process, we would call traditional notions of due process where a right is concerned.
What about the plans, which were either leaked or maybe officially released, I'm not sure, about the governor's plan to fund and appoint a force of at least 13 individuals who would be, in effect, gun police, whose job would be to go and confiscate the guns that had now been made illegal and not grandfathered in?
Well, I think that's not a big part of the story, only because it's new laws that we're concerned about that steal liberty from the people, not necessarily new agents to steal the liberty that's already been removed. That'll come either way. It's the gun grabbing itself that is the problem.
All right, let's move south to Kentucky, where a lawmaker, that's what the media calls a politician, wants to give police the power to detain people who don't answer their questions. There seems something a little bit wrong with with that notion.
Just a little bit, Tim. Yeah, I always think that I'm trying to remember the first time I ever heard a legislator say, well, the courts will fix it if it's wrong. In other words, like, we don't have to worry about whether this legislation passes constitutional muster. It either will or it won't in the courts. And I wanted to bring this to the table because it's outrageous. And people hopefully should be mindful of it. And Senator Stephen Meredith and his attempt to basically trample on the rights just to be free in Kentucky, okay, and not have to engage with law enforcement personnel by giving them your information for no particular reason. You know, it's like, oh, they don't like the cut of your jib, so they're going to, jack you up. And I just think it's always incumbent upon all members of government to always try to make sure that our constitutional rights are upheld. And so that's what should be the fate of this law, is that the fellow legislators should say, it doesn't matter if it be a good idea or would help law enforcement, it's a clear violation of constitutional rights and should be dismissed. But Virginia's not the only place where legislators are trying to seize the people's liberty, Tim.
Well, the element of this that you discussed first about let's go ahead and pass a law and the courts will decide, whether it's actually constitutional or not, reminds me of what happened with McCain-Feingold, where strict limits were put on political speech leading up to elections, and the Congress went ahead and passed it, and the president signed it, only to find that it was unconstitutional. And I always thought it was a black mark on George W. Bush that he basically took that approach, like, I'll just go ahead and take the path of least resistance, sign it, and send it up to the court and let, Roberts and Scalia and company shoot it down if they want to.
I don't recall George Bush having such reverence for the Constitution that surprises me, Tim. I agree.
Well, finally, let's talk about one more thing, and that's Trump's Labor Department providing clarity on so-called joint employment.
Well, the reason why I think this is an important story, Tim, it just continues to illustrate, as we've done from time to time here, about how the regulatory state impacts liberty. And Trump has generally been aces in this area, I think, removing the restrictions that people have in order to deal with other people. The Obama administration in 2015 basically expanded this rule so that more people were liable for the misdeeds of another. So what I mean by that is if you own Company A and you do business with Company B and maybe you hire out subcontractors through Company C, who's in charge of making sure that those people's withholdings get taken care of and that sort of thing, right? Well, these things were expanded under the Obama administration because the unions want more people to sue, okay? And the government wants more people to be able to effectively sue and go after for these things if they're not done right. But if you have massive exposure to this kind of liability as a person doing business or a company doing business, what the end result is that fewer people will be hired and less economic activity will take place. Now, that's not necessarily a problem to the unions who have, high wages and benefits. But for the least of people, encouraging any more employment is a good thing. And I think, this is part and parcel as to why we are seeing a good economy, Tim. It's these rules that are relaxed or peeled back from their most, government-focused to business-focused.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, all available at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.